and the rain came tumbling down. My, are y'all singing Rain, Rain, Go Away? It's been raining for days. I have a story called The Warrior Leader from the Storybook Bible. It's the story of Joshua and the Battle of Jericho from Joshua 3 and 6. You know, sometimes we've sang the song, Joshua fought the battle at Jericho, Jericho, Jericho. Joshua fought the battle at Jericho and the walls came tumbling down. You remember that? Well, here's the story. After Moses died, God gave his people a new leader. His name was Joshua, which means the Lord saves. Joshua was going to lead God's people into the special land God had promised to give them. By this time, God's people had been wandering around in the baking desert for 40 years. That's a lifetime. So you can imagine how sick they were of sand and anything yellow and tents and walking and being hot. And how happy they were to reach the edge of the desert and to see their beautiful new home. Right there in front of them, cool and green and lovely. There was only one problem. Jericho. Jericho was a city, but it wasn't just any old city. It was a fortress, and it stopped everyone from getting into the land. The people looked at Jericho, at the big, giant, scary walls all around it, at the tall, towering ramparts, at the heavy iron gates bolted shut, and they looked at each other. See that fortress? Wow. What would they do? No one knew, but God knew. And God told Joshua what to do. But Joshua must have looked surprised because it was a very odd battle plan indeed, as we'll find out. Then God made his people a promise. I will always be with you, and I will never, ever leave you. If you do what I say, your lives in the new land will be happy, and everything will go well. So Joshua gathered his army together, and they had their swords. Got your sword ready? And they had their shields and whatever else that spears. They had spears, and they were ready to fight. But the plan wasn't about fighting. I mean, that's what people knew. It was about trusting and doing what God said. Joshua's army went marching around the city. Day after day after day. They're too scared to fight, the people in Jericho said. And they would just march around and around the fortress. But they were wrong. God's people weren't scared. They were waiting for God to tell them what to do next. On the seventh day of just marching around, God told his people to march around the city not once, but 7 times. Then God told everyone to make as much noise as they could. They had horns. They screamed and yelled. They were probably saying, let's get them. Let's take Jericho. Well, have you ever made as much noise as you want? You remember in the gym sometime I'll say, just scream as loud as you can. Well, I'm imagining that's how it was that day. Well, there were 39,999 people making that noise. That was ear-splitting, and I'm sure it was scary. As it turned out, it was stone-splitting too, because the huge, strong walls of Jericho, crumbled to the ground. As if they were made of sand, Jericho vanished in a great cloud of dust. So it was that God's people entered their new home, and they didn't have to fight to get it. They only had to walk. Joshua said, God has brought you safely here. Now will you do what he says? Everyone said, we promise. Only God can make your heart happy. Joshua said, so don't pray to pretend gods. No, they said, no, never. I'm afraid they didn't keep their promise. They didn't do what God said, and many years later, just as God warned them, things would go badly for God's people. They would lose their home. Enemies would capture them and take them off as slaves again. And God's people would scatter into many different lands. But God's plan was still working. One day he would give his people another leader, another home. But this home, no one could ever take from them. Joshua fought the battle at Jericho. Great story. Hey, have a great week.